I'm gonna tickle your brain today with a question. Now, suppose an untouchable on the Hindu caste system were to be treated as the bottom of the Hindu rung. But then, this untouchable is given a job, a salary, and dignity by the British colonialists. And this untouchable becomes a British loyalist and an Anglophile. Do you blame the untouchable? Do you say that this untouchable is whitewashed, self-hating, and mentally colonized? Or do you blame the caste system? That is a question that will form the basis of today's video. You know, I was talking to my African-American friend the other day, and in fact, my African-American friend is in fact one of my best friends. He and I, a very unlikely pair of friends, a Peranakan man who's alienated from mainstream Chinese Malaysian society, and he, an African-American who is called an Oreo, who's apparently black on the outside and white on the inside, because he doesn't hang his pants low, he doesn't dress like a ghetto thug, and he speaks proper English, not Ebonics. So the two of us became very, very good friends due to our shared trauma, you could say. And he told me, well, you know how it is with these race hustlers, the people who always say, oh, you are African American, you're black, and you're never going to be white, so support us in our cause. And at the same time, we're not going to include you in our celebration party after we have achieved victory over the white man. Yes, in the same way that I am supposed to be Chinese Malaysian, at least when it's convenient, when they want my numbers in order to support the Chinese Malaysian agenda for identity preservation, which is frankly basically the polite way of saying don't become like those Baba Nyonyas, those Lao Ya Lang, those decadent anglicized Peranakans. So I'm supposed to support this Chinese cultural identity preservation, but at the same time, you know, I'm not included in the victory feast either, you see. I mean, it's not just about being a so-called banana, which is a Chinese person who is supposed to be yellow on the outside and white on the inside. Now, of course, there are lots of criticisms to be made about how Chinese people are policed by their community in the same way black people are policed by their community into conforming to a certain Han-centric standard of Chineseness. I'm talking about the diaspora, not mainland China. And those who don't conform are verbally abused sometimes, if not physically abused, like beaten up in school, right? But my issue is that I have another strike against me, which is my brown skin and my flat nose, which makes me even more hated than the regular Chinese Malaysian Sinkeh banana, right? Do you know what they called me on Laoyat Forum? They called me a biryani. Yes, they called me a biryani, which means that I'm, well, brown on the outside and white on the inside, basically, because I identify as Peranakan. And you should see the angry comments that were launched at Josephine Chia, the Singaporean writer, the Peranakan writer, who said that she was Peranakan, not Chinese, and she would rejoice if her identity card could state Peranakan instead of Chinese. Now, for the sake of convenience, the Malaysian and Singaporean states lumped us in all under the same category. In the same way, they might lump in a black American with a Jamaican, the Peranakan being like the Jamaican, in this case, the Creole, right? But this has created friction, unhappiness, and mismatched expectations on both sides. You see, so, you know, I would also rejoice if my identity card could say Peranakan, not Chinese. So I always pick the other category whenever I am compelled to fill in a form which requires me to state my race, you see, because I don't identify as Chinese Malaysian. I've never been treated as Chinese Malaysian, and I'm useful when it concerns census numbers, but I'm not particularly welcome in the mainstream urban Chinese Malaysian community. I'm not saying that Chinese Malaysians are cruel people, I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is that I feel like a perpetual foreigner in Chinese Malaysian society. I mean, I could learn how to speak Chinese, I could pick up a bit of Cantonese or Mandarin or Hokkien, but I can't change my face, and I certainly cannot change my flat nose or my honey-toned skin. And this accent, yeah, I mean, I can talk in a Malaysian Chinese accent, but that wouldn't be natural. I'm talking in the same way my grandfather used to speak, you see. My grandfather was a Straits Times reading, old school Peranakan gentleman who spoke like the Queen of England and wore a sarong. And I'm just his ideological descendant, and his biological descendant as well. But you get my point. Now, it's true that I ruffle quite a lot of feathers in the East Asian diaspora, particularly in America and Malaysia, right? Especially those online Asian activist groups. You know, although I sympathize with their hatred for Western chauvinism and their hatred for white supremacy, the fact of the matter is that they can never reconcile the fact that I speak with a British accent, and I, don't exactly have a face that matches the accent in their worldview. And I don't particularly share their neurotic hatred for the West and their hatred for anything Western, including English spoken in a Western accent. And I don't particularly share their neurotic obsession with the preservation of East Asian languages, basically. They got so angry and triggered when I said that, no, I don't really have any emotional connection to the Chinese language, because that's literally not my mother tongue. My literal mother tongue that was passed down to me by my English teacher, Nyonya grandmother, is English, okay? You got shame and tiger parenting, while I got English nursery rhymes, basically. So, forgive me if I don't share your enthusiasm for preserving the Chinese language in Malaysia. It doesn't really matter to me, although I sympathize if you feel that your language is being erased, because frankly, my ancestral language, Baba Malay, is already on the verge of extinction, while the Chinese language is spoken by the majority of the world's population. So no, if anyone is going to have a siege mentality, that should be me, considering then that there are less than 1,000 known speakers of Baba Malay in the world. But because I don't share in the Pan-Asianist blanket Western hatred, and I don't particularly feel any motivation to learn Chinese, in the same way, I don't particularly feel any emotional connection to the French language, apparently that makes me whitewashed. Yeah, I went from being an anti-imperialist to being a whitewashed traitor just overnight. There were people in the Asian activist groups in America calling me things like mentally colonized. They were calling me whitewashed. They were saying, they were saying that, you are an anglicized Chinese. And there was one Korean American fellow, a most charming fellow, who even called me a British bootlicking cuck with too much British boot up my ass, apparently. Yes, because I don't share in their anti-Western trauma. And I even had death threats launched at me. Yes, literal death threats by the Chinese Malaysian ultras, because apparently I was attacking the Chinese community, right? In the same way a Peranakan professor, Teo Kok Siong, was accused of attacking the Chinese community because he critiqued vernacular Chinese schools as insular bubbles. And he was dragged to the police station by the Chinese ultras. Even though this man is supposed to be Chinese, he's still Peranakan like me. So anything we say is already seen as suspect if we make any good faith criticisms of the Chinese Malaysian community. You see, we're disqualified by the fact that we're not part of the community. We're only part of the community when it's useful, right? When it comes to votes or numbers. Now look, I sympathize with people from the diaspora community, whether that be the diaspora Asians in America or the Chinese Malaysians who don't quite feel at home in Malaysia. Because I don't share your feeling of being not at home, because I evolved for centuries to adapt to this land. So naturally, my tongue, as I mentioned in the previous video, my tongue craves curry, not hot pot or dongporo. That's not what my tongue craves. I dream in English because it's the language that was passed down to me by my Straits Chinese grandparents, and the English lullabies that was sung to me by my Nyonya grandmother. You know, I still remember the taste of her jihu cha. But no, the point is, while I sympathize with your feeling of alienation from the country, I have to tell you that you don't have a right to claim me as part of your community if you will not even see me as the same race when it's not convenient. Yes, the other day I was on a dating app called Tantan, and this Amoy asked me where I was from, and I said it's the same old question. I'm always being asked where I'm from because, you know, I don't match, my face doesn't match the face of a typical Chinese Malaysian, right? And before you knew it, she'd unmatched me before I'd said anything. So if you're gonna treat me as a different race, then don't expect me to support your ethnic causes, okay? I think clan halls are an outdated and reactionary bourgeois institution, and Guanxi is also a reactionary bourgeois institution. But I'm not saying this as a Peranakan, I'm saying this as a Marxist, okay? I'm not beholden to the Chinese identity preservation in Malaysia simply because I was not accepted as fully Chinese in the first place. Neither was Teo Kok Siong. So he has the freedom to criticize or critique vernacular schools. But I'm definitely not gonna dumb down my British accent and sound more local in order to make you more comfortable. Because I don't see you speaking in English, even though you can insult me in the English language. I don't see you speaking in English when it comes to your own insular spaces like Tar College or your 100% Chinese friend groups at the offices. I don't see you trying to accommodate the rest of Malaysia. So I'm not going to dumb down my accent to sound more Malaysian Chinese simply because, well, for the same reason, my friend who's called Honorio is not going to speak Ebonic simply because, you know, he wants to, because he's not going to speak Ebonics in order to get the approval of people who hate him, right? So this is the accent of my grandfather, and it is my inheritance, right? But at the same time, I did not inherit your shame in liking British things, okay? One of my ex-girlfriends even said that I was 100% like Professor Higgins from My Fair Lady. And it's a comment that I accept with relish rather than with dread, because I like being compared to Professor Higgins, okay? That is my personality. If you want to call me whitewashed, go ahead. I'm beyond caring by this point. But the point is, Peranakans and Sinkehs did not suffer the same way, right? We didn't suffer the same way under colonialism, and we evolved differently under colonialism. And it's about damn time that we acknowledge this fact. Now, what do I mean by we suffered differently? We both suffered, but we suffered differently. Okay, let me put it this way. You were excluded by the British. You were turned into coolies, into prostitutes, into starving wage slaves for rapacious British capitalists, right? And I acknowledge that that is part of your trauma. And, you know, that is why, you know, you inherited vitriolic hatred for the British, and I don't blame you. But I was locked out of your clan halls, you see. The Peranakan, who had been rooted in this land for hundreds of years, was locked out of the clan hall. So when they turned to the British, it was not because one day they decided, we're going to speak English, our children will be called Sarah, Christopher and Annabelle. No, it was because it was a matter of survival, you see. This Chinese ultra, this Chinese diaspora ultra, this Chinese Malaysian ultra said to me that, you know, you speak like a Cambridge educated lawyer. Your folks were richer than most of the people in Chinatown. Because Peranakans didn't typically live in Chinatown, okay, during the British colonial times. And, you know, basically your ancestors were British loyalists, right? And basically, he was saying that you would be the target of a Maoist struggle session, is what he was telling me. And what I could see there was basically diaspora rage, because he hadn't processed his anger towards the British. And he was basically taking it out on a symbol of the British, someone he regarded as the colonizer's pet. Now let me make something very clear. You see, those people who call me mentally colonized, who say that I am basically brainwashed by the colonizers, basically do not know the real reason why Peranakans joined up with the British, and the truth is less glamorous than you think. Okay, I'm not actually trying to justify myself. I don't really care whether you love me or hate me, but I'm quite sick and tired about how everyone in the Chinese community is supposed to cosplay trauma, cosplay colonial trauma, and hate the British and hate the English language in the same way, when for some of us it was the only source of dignity. Because, let me tell you something, when the late arrival Chinese first came to Malaya, they looked at the Peranakan and they thought, and they saw this Peranakan eating rice with his hands, okay, speaking Malay and not Chinese, dressing in kabayas and not in cheongsams or samfus, and basically, you know, having facial features that didn't match the typical Han phenotype. Did they receive the Peranakan as long-lost brothers? No. What they did was build clan halls and explicitly kept the Peranakans out of these clan halls. Yes, you know, for many of these clan halls, whether they be Hokkien clan halls or Teochew or Cantonese or Hakka or Hainanese clan halls, one of the rules that they made was that you had to speak the dialect, right? So that's, most Peranakans failed in that regard, okay? The second rule they made was that you had to be born in China or have a parent who was born in China. Again, while not while there's no explicit rule that says Peranakans can't join, Peranakans are also disqualified from the clan halls in that regard. So they did not have the protection of the Kongsi clubs, of the clan halls. And the great irony is that if my ancestor, my Baba Nyonyas ancestor, had gone to those clan halls to ask for a job, they would have slammed the door in their face or politely told them that you're not quite what we're looking for. Right? In the same way, after teaching English for 1 year at Kuan Cheng and not learning any Chinese, they told me that you'd be better off teaching at an international school because you simply don't fit our culture, right? So I went to the international school, and that's where I thrived, right? Teaching English. This is the same reason why the Peranakans, while not being able to thrive under Sinkeh patronage, suddenly found themselves thriving under the British, because the British didn't necessarily like them, but they trusted them because they were neither too Malay nor too Chinese. So they were sort of just in the middle. And because of that, because the British were the only group that was willing to give the Peranakans dignity, many of them ended up calling themselves Queen's Chinese. When I called myself a Queen's Chinese, I made some Chinese American diasporoids so angry. They got so triggered and angry. But the fact of the matter is that that was where my ancestors' dignity came from, okay? It's like if an untouchable, for example, in India, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, is at the bottom of the caste system, right? And this untouchable is recruited by the British administration as a clerk, a teacher, or even a lawyer. He's trained up and given a role, a salary, and a position in the imperialist machine, even if it's not a plum role. And this individual becomes an Anglophile. Do you say that this untouchable is mentally colonized because he praises the British for giving him opportunities that he would not have gotten under the Hindu caste system? Or do you blame the caste system for pushing him towards the British? So if you're going to blame my ancestors, or you're going to blame the Peranakans for going to the British and calling themselves Queen's Chinese, you might first want to ask yourself why we were rejected by your clan halls and rejected by your new arrival communities for not being Chinese enough for your taste. Now, in 1961, the Chinese community leader, Headmaster Lim Len Giok, who is considered the soul of the Malaysian Chinese community, said that Chinese vernacular schools are the fortress of Chinese culture. For them to be merged into the national system would mean the spiritual death of the Chinese community. But when Mr. Lim was talking about the Chinese community, he certainly was not talking about my Peranakan grandmother Ruby, who did not speak Mandarin or read any Chinese characters, who was culturally closer to an English schoolmistress, she taught English, than a Chinese matriarch. He was not talking about her because as far as Lim Len Giok was concerned, my grandmother was already spiritually dead. Yes, my Nyonya grandmother was an example, even if he didn't say it directly, she was an example of a cautionary tale as to what the Chinese Malaysians might become without vernacular schools. And you wonder why I don't particularly have any great love for them, you see, because the idea that Chinese Malaysian identity loss is a fate worse than death implies that to become like me or my grandmother is basically to become spiritually dead, culturally rootless, a fate worse than death, you see. Yes, as far as most of the mainstream Chinese Malaysians in colonial times were concerned, the Peranakans, the Baba Nyonyas, were already spiritually dead, you see, and they were not counted as authentic Chinese. So my grandmother, if she had gone to get a job at Lim Len Gyok School, why then she would be turned away. But under the British, she was able to teach English to children of all races. My grandmother was building bridges, okay, and that's what I'm trying to do as well. Believe me, I don't hate you if you're a Chinese ultra. I don't hate you. I pity you, you see. But the point is, I pity you because you're such a frightened person. You're so frightened that turning out like me would be a fate worse than death. I mean, you know, it doesn't flatter me, of course, to be your cautionary tale. But what I am saying is that we turned to the British not to oppress you, but because you turned us away first, okay? We were not Chinese enough for your taste. And if you find the word Sinkeh or late arrival to be an offensive word, how do you think we found the word Lao Ya Lang or decadent person? How do you think we found that word? Not very nice, was it? So yeah, I mean, you considered our curry-eating, kabaya-wearing ways to be too weird, too alien for your Chinese sensibilities. So we were not welcome to your clan halls. That's why we threw in our lot with the British. Not because of any love for the colonizers, but a matter of survival. When your children have to eat, you don't have the luxury of purity politics, okay? But I think that for the sake of convenience, Malaysia and Singapore has lumped in Peranakans and Han Chinese as being one and the same race. And like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, that has caused much tension and frustration. Like you saw how the reaction was to Josephine Chia's article, basically. Now, I'm not saying all Peranakans will share my views, but what I am saying is that by categorizing all Chinese Malaysians or Chinese Singaporeans as being basically overseas Chinese rather than Nusantaran, why then you're going to end up with a lot of frustration, right? Because people don't necessarily behave the same way. This is a very unpopular truth, but human beings are not the same. Communities are not the same. Communities have very different worldviews, and different communities have very different ideas on how the world works. Okay, so if you say that we're the same, it's like saying an African American and a Jamaican are both black and they should be held to the same standards, or they should be regarded as being the same people. They are not, and we are not, okay? I think it's better for us to be good neighbors rather than bad housemates, you know? That's what I'm saying. Because right now this living arrangement, metaphorical living arrangement, is not working very well. It's causing much tension on both sides. So I think it's better for us to have a clean divorce rather than a miserable living arrangement. Because you guys have the sheer power of numbers, right? So if I were to marry one of you, for example, I would be expected to tone down my Peranakan culture, tone down my accent. Likely I would be expected to tone down my Baba Nyonyas culture, tone down my accent, stop wearing a sarong, or at least only wear it in the privacy of our home, and basically send my children to Mandarin tuition, right? That's what I would be expected. I would be expected to assimilate into your culture because, well, put it this way, your culture is the default because you have strength in numbers, right? But if we identify ourselves and categorize ourselves as two separate groups which evolve very differently, I imagine we would have much less frustration and we'd actually get along, you and I. Yes, I want to get along with the Chinese ultras, really I do. but you don't want to get along with me unless I assimilate into your culture and learn Chinese. So and stop calling myself a Nusantaran. So yeah, it's not that I don't want to get along, but you're making the terms of getting along very difficult. But this is not an assimilationist video. I don't intend to tell you to assimilate to Malaysia or get out. But what I am saying is stop saying we're all Chinese and we must all stand united together when some of us are more Chinese than others when it comes down to the crunch, right? Because we all know that everyone is equally Chinese, but some Chinese are more equal than others in our hierarchy. But what if we were to create two separate categories? Why then we would have much less frustration, I imagine, and I imagine we'd get along much better. But my point still stands. Even if you say that, okay, as a Peranakan, go your own way, do your thing, I still think that you should basically respect this land that you sit on, right? Don't only regard it as some kind of a halfway stop where you extract its resources, but you don't share the joy with the other people of this land, right? So if you want to form your own Chinese bubbles and you don't want to mix around with people like with Malays, Indians or Peranakans, I also take an issue with that, you see. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to call yourself Malaysian, okay, and I know you're going to say, oh, we only formed these bubbles because of May 13. No, you formed them long before Tunku Abdul Rahman was even born, okay? You formed these bubbles in the 19th century, before Malaya was formed, fine. But if you're going to call yourself Malaysian, then share this country with us and walk with us, live with us, not above us, okay? So don't confuse integration into Malaysia as capitulation. Don't confuse integration, that is to say living alongside the rest of Malaysia, as assimilation. It is not, okay? For example, what is an example of integration? Making friends across racial groups, that's an example, and I think everyone should do that, okay? If you're in a group where some people in the group don't speak Chinese, it's naturally courtesy to speak English or Malay, because if you can insult me in that language, you can certainly speak the language to include everybody, right? So Peranakans never asked the new arrivals to assimilate into the Peranakan way, okay? We never said put on a kabaya and speak Malay all the time. But we did expect a modicum of respect for the hosts of this land, right? When Tan Cheng Lock gave you people citizenship in the 1950s, jus soli, you might call it, it was done under the assumption that you would share this piece of land with all of us, and not live like a separate class of people altogether, you know, refusing to interact with or befriend or date anyone outside your Chinese circle. That's not what he expected, okay? So if you're going to call this land home, then treat it like home and don't treat it like a hotel. But like I said, respect has to be mutual, okay? I don't disrespect your Chinese language or your Chinese culture. I am merely saying that I don't have the same emotional connection to your language as you might. So don't assume that we're going to have the same worldviews, okay? Just because we have the same surname, right? But aside from that, no, this video is not meant to say you can't keep your culture. You can, but it's merely a video to make people think, okay? Respect is a two-way street, yeah? You want respect, show respect, okay? Thank you. Have a wonderful day.